I've noticed that when you don't pick up a weapon, like it even doesn't do anything. Like it's not pointing at the weapon. It's just like it takes a second for it to put it through.
Yeah.
What did you guys have on? Shoot, Escape 3. What do you guys got?
Escape 3. I got 13.03.
I got 13.47.
I got
3. Dang, Cody. I bet you don't have 0.
blah 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 blah.
Okay,
blah, blah,
Mason,
blah, blah.
you know that choke point where you turn left in Escape 3 to get to the door and go? Every time I do there, I get launched away.
What?
This guy just launches me into the wall above the door. It pisses me off every time.
Watch this. When I really.
Alright.
Oh, whoa, Mason, I just do this.
We're playing Carlson.
No, Cameron, I'll show you how you do it.
And then I would wall it down and go in here.
Let's show you how it's done.
What? What? You gotta do that. Yeah, you gotta do that. That's your runs.
Yeah, that's what I did to get unlucky.
Hey!
No, it's
That was perfect.
So basically, yo, hey Mason, wanna start at tutorial level 1 and see if you can like get to the end first?
I just said that.
Yeah, I know, but like, would you want to do that now?
I got a faster time.
Put this layer
On
I got
what?
10.87.
On what?
Yeah, sure.
Alright. Okay. Start at tutorial 3.
Oh shit, okay, I'll hit retry. You just, it starts as soon as you click it.
Okay. 3, 2, 1, go.
Oh, the music.
You guys just racing the first level?
You know, we're racing all of that. No!
Yes!
It's over. The run's over. Hey Mason, restart.
Oh wait, you guys racing the whole game?
Yeah.
Oh wait, can you guys restart for me?
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
we will.
yeah,
We
yeah.
will.
Oh wow!
Yes, restart, Mason.
Yeah, Mason, restart.
Hey, I'm
all
not
3
restarting.
for me.
No, what? No, I was restarted.
You're just mad because you lost.
Wait,
Yes, I am. I am.
Yeah, we are right now.
Wait. Oh, cool. 3.
Okay, wait. 3, 2,
That means
1, go.
that are bad, or else we can get Don't do them.
Oh, Mason messed up. Mason messed up.
I keep trying to be ballsy and I keep messing up. I mean,
Is that a bad word?
So I swear on my good YouTube channel.
Oh my god. Mason, eat my dick and balls.
YouTube.
Oh, that was bad, dude. Run's over.
Alright, cool. I'm gonna get this time.
No.
Run's over.
Can I give up?
I'm gonna do the sun first this
Can
time.
we restart again?
No.
no.
Run's over.
I wonder, is there moving goes with my Incorrect.
Incorrect point. You asked a question.
Oh no, I really messed up my momentum here.
This one's pretty cringe.
I'm gonna kill you, Kobe.
That's fair.
Good point.
Wait, are you allowed to say that?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know.
Oh my god.
I'm really messing up Sandbox 3 here.
I have notifications off.
What the heck? I can't do Sandbox 2. I can't do this level. Oh my god. Thomas, it's your fault.
What'd I do this time, man?
Pressure.
Boing.
I tried to accelerate myself, didn't work.
That's so good.
Ah, stupid wall. I'm messing up everything, bro. The pressure is on.
Should say.
I'm gonna use this every day.
It's
Almost.
a work of art.
That's what I'm with this.
I like streaks.
Cool. Exactly. Use all my-
No!
Yeah.
Oh my god.
I used to do
Yeah, I
that.
have two. So the two people I actually ever talk to after their business. Oh, my Bitmoji story is replenished. Replenished. I want to rewatch Even Guardian.
I don't really like the anime, but that one's interesting.
I like the
Milk,
idea
milk,
of
milk,
that.
milk, milk.
Watch the same one outside of it. People watch it. It's kind of like the same thing
So,
as-
we've been playing this game quite a bit. Bruh! You killed me! Who does that? Who does that?
What a monster.
Give me milk.
Do you have a chat?
Yeah, but there's probably like no one. Oh, I'm alive. Oh, it's this one. This is my level.
Okay, hold on. I gotta wait for the There we go.
Bro, I just failed my level, bro.
And he stays there for like 10 seconds.
So,
Just wiggling around.
how are you guys doing so far?
I'm on the 3rd level!
I'm halfway through my Bitmoji story.
Oh, swag, bro.
Dude, wait, there's a Bitmoji story?
Yeah, it's about yoga this time.
Ah!
Why is this so there? Wait, I can search. Bitmoji story?
Oh, I recovered. That was an awful run. Just don't kill me,
Serious
please.
case of emojis. Drive through.
I remember I got a big one.
Where's the word guy?
Nah, I'm more of a chicken sandwich kind of guy.
Apparently she's
No!
not. Nice, you said.
No! I said woods.
What? Are you kidding me? I missed the milk? Bruh.
Wow!
That is so rude! How could someone do that
What
in
a
good
fat
conscience?
whore.
I agree. Like, honestly, bro, like, I don't know what's happening. Just...
Dang, guys.
Oh, it's this one.
What stream are you on?
Milk. Milk. No!
Cookies, ice cream. Yeah, not feeling those later. She's a fat bitch. Torte, Japanese pastry, apple pie, blah blah blah. Oh. Hazelnut,
No, you stupid.
hazelnut
dummy.
mouse. With a cream brulee.
Get out of the way!
God, are you doing it on purpose? Okay.
With a cream Bruce Lee.
Clean Bruce Lee.
Cinnamon and raspberry glaze on top.
Oh no, I haven't done these levels before.
Why don't you
Cameron,
ever
how
have
far are
anything in
you?
the fridge?
I'm on
This
the
girl!
Yo, you said like 10 things. How
She
could
just
you
wants
think you
my
have
food.
nothing- How could you think that she would have nothing in the fridge?
That-
That is just
No, how about do
That's when the
this?
next day she goes to the fast food.
This is insane.
Look, that was
Those Bitmoji stories are so wacky.
that's because 8 days ago it was the we don't have the food one, and 7 days ago,
No!
which was the next day. She went
It's
to
your
the
fault, Mason.
drive-thru.
I did it. I won.
You won?
Yeah, I finished.
I'm just swinging.
I got 26 seconds.
Oh.
I did really good on that. I did good.
This guy, all he does is sit there and get in your way. Like all the other guys.
See, I thought you guys were further behind, so I was not doing it very well.
I was like behind at first, and then I caught up really fast. And Thomas got like 3 times on the shots like that.
Well, yeah, because I kept trying to do the barrel jump instead of like actually trying.
Is this kind of country?
Yo,
What the hell is this?
Huh? This is good.
What is this? It just dunks me in the way. Through a door.
Oh, let's do it.
No!
No!
Guys! They're not dog!
Marty Robbins got hit by a train conducted by Arthur Morgan.
What is a filing cabinet there? Shut up, Will. Why are you so loud, bro? Bro, loud.
Here, Cameron.
Oh, look,
Cheater.
Wait,
That's it? That's it?
Skipping levels.
Read the Mason 3 text. What are you saying? I need my phone back, please.
Well, now that the competition's over, now I'm just having fun.
Yo, who wants to listen to the Cha-Cha Slide?
Bro, yeah, play
Cha-Cha
that.
slide.
I'm not doing it because earlier I did.
I hate this level.
Wait.
Wait, but you guys want to do the DJ Casper kind or Cupid?
Some things.
Oh, sweet, dude. Ghetto Avengers.
Damn. Alright. I'm going back to my level, bro. Escape 2.
you mind?
Do you?
Yes!
Cool.
Here. Boom, boom. This game is
No,
sweet.
hold on, it's important. Is that on music? It's important. Go to settings. Video settings. Go to video settings. You gotta get ×2. DJ Speed!
Oh, wait, you want to do DJ Mental? Or MC Mental? I love this one.
Wait, what about torture dance? Wait.
Bro.
Mason!
Yeah.
Mason!
What happened, Mason?
Thomas, Sky 0, I got sub 0. I mean sub 4.
What?
A new tax law allows people to claim on the internet they have black and joke words. Stuff like CEOs or taxes when you plastered on billboards.
Thomas, you gotta beat this time, man.
What'd you get?
I got Sky 0, 387.
Bro, fuck Sky Zero. Sky Zero is just RNG.
It's not RNG.
No, I almost got sub 20, bro.
Kelly said which one of you guys had this from. A little bit. You guys wanna do another race?
Doing torture dance in that case.
What?
Can you next?
No, I
Jesus
can't
Christ, what are you guys doing over here?
Rematch.
only if you can beat my epic time.
Sit down, sit down. Don't hurt yourself.
Yeah, sure, I'll play.
You're gonna lose a knee.
I didn't cheat.
Yeah, I quit. That's what it was.
Okay, fine.
You already won, so I just skipped.
Hey, wait,
You guys ready?
Jesus Christ.
2, 1, go!
2.
I'm gaming!
Do you get any sponsorships?
No.
Okay, cool.
Dude, imagine not being, what's it called? Monetized.
What's it called?
Bro, holy.
Hey.
I messed up the tutorial! I suck!
You can't even
Sorry, but you're cringe!
Thomas is cringe!
I'm going to kill you!
Oh!
I want to hear Princess, but something I really don't want.
Story time, Dairy Queen.
Yeah, I
thought
quit.
was
I give
10.
up.
The entire organization of Dairy Queen.
Yeah, I'm done.
Story time, I ate a mustard blizzard.
Yeah,
How do I get out of the menu?
Cameron Mason ate a mustard blizzard.
Gone wrong.
Chris made him buy it, and he
I spent
made
$4
a
on it.
blizzard of mustard. And Grayson ate it. Oh god.
It was pretty
No!
God, I can't do it. Okay, you know what? I'm doing it safe.
Yeah, you're right. I can't beat the first level.
I see you torch Nathan right there.
I keep going up.
It sucks, man.
I'm
It's
trying
so
to
hard
write
get the whole-
justice.
Of course. Yeah.
I keep failing on this.
That's what I like to hear.
Ow, 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 my feet and butt. So I saw pictures of.
This is about as classic.
It's deflating.
Somebody turn it on real quick. No, I'm talking about my
I was just gonna make that joke. Dang it.
Yeah.
No, but I was talking about fat ball.
Get off the wall. Stop it.
Milk! I'm gonna say that every time you kill a level.
Thank you.
Huh?
Thank you. I need
Yeah,
that.
well, no, he's not with level.
Of course. Dang, Rosu. Dang, bro. Oh my Jesus. Oh!
I need the grenade one.
Thomas, what's your opinion on chastity laws?
What?
What's that? I forgot.
Overprotective parents of the law, so including dicks. Milk!
Sorry for that. Oh yeah, milk?
Thank you, Kobe. I need that.
I'm the one that said it.
Yeah, you reminded me.
Yeah, I know. I know.
But I'm the one, I do it.
Oh, okay. Just make sure you get
My
this.
face on the milk brand.
Ah, I understand.
No, I lost all the momentum.
Wow, look at you. You suck. Oh, you missed the bounce pad.
Thomas, you cringe.
Mason, what level are you on?
Same one.
What did you just
Are you on
eat?
the same one as me?
Yeah.
Oh no.
Wait, cook.
I can't do it, Mason. I've lost it. I'm retiring.
Sympathy.
Mason, I'm retiring.
Sit.
Mason, I'm retiring. I'm retiring, Mason. I can't do it.
Thomas quits because he's mad.
I'm gonna watch Steven Universe, so I feel like I'm not here.
It's gonna restart. Game it fast time.
What should I watch though?
No, my momentum. What was that?
Mason, make a piston in sound.
Oh, what was that? Ah!
You made the wrong noise and that's up to you.
Mason, I'm just walking.
You're on the same level, by the way.
Dude, imagine dying.
I haven't said milk in like at least a minute.
Well, yeah, because I suck.
No, you don't!
Get this.
You are a gamer!
I'm retiring. I can't do it.
No, you're a gamer! You're the best gamer this state scene!
Did you see that run, bro? I failed miserably.
But you're a gamer, and gamers always prevail.
Mason's gonna win.
Sing the gamer anthem.
Dun, 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 dun.
Don't eat it.
Amen. No. Cringe!
Mason, Mason, have you gotten past this level yet? You probably have.
I think we need
You're on
some
like.
better music than what we're all getting played.
Play the better version.
Every day I dream of a Minecraft server.
I don't know any other ones.
Someone
The
please.
freaking Sayonara.
Someone please look up that song Minecraft remix.
The Doki Doki Minecraft one?
Yeah, I don't know the fucking name of the song. Headass.
Doki Doki Minecraft.
Oh,
Oh,
Kobe,
it's
the launch
animated.
pad. The launch pad didn't send me
Ew.
straight up.
It's animated.
I gotta recover.
don't like this.
Oh, all that time you're losing.
Oh god!
Oh lord!
Why is it Minecraft?
Guys, it's Ginny. When they're close and it was never.
Oh, stop!
Go big.
I've seen it in the version of the
Go
song.
big.
It genuinely hurts.
Dory man.
And you already know me.
I have to delete this. This feels like playing Geometry Dash at this point. Are you okay?
Hold on, I gotta see this.
Thank you. Hold on, I gotta see.
I'll pause.
Come here. It's right
I
here.
gotta see. Play it.
It's over here. No, it's on
I
this
can't look at it.
Oh yeah, that's the same one.
Thomas, we've seen this before.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we've seen
I
this.
played this for this.
Hey!
Fast forward to it.
No, it gets far worse once they start speaking.
Minecraft Jenny?
Okay, I can't hold this.
Hold on.
I can't physically hold the thing playing the video.
Oh, it hurts so bad. I don't know
What do
why
you
my
think?
body.
I'm pausing. Not pausing.
I don't know this song.
It's important.
This morning.
Thomas, we pausing or are you getting
I don't care, bro.
Amerino. Martine.
Oh man,
There it is! Yeah, Mason! Mason! Mason, you know this one.
I'm so glad you're joining the literature club.
Mason!
Oh, it's this one!
Yeah, it's so bad, I hate
Club's
it.
newest member.
I'm going to die.
Dude, this
What
one's
is
great.
this?
No, this is great. Monica?
No, it's not.
Yuri?
This is not great.
No, it is.
Gary doesn't have bad taste.
It's a cringe drink. Oh no! We're still streaming!
Yes.
We're showing this on the stream!
This hurts.
What are we doing?
Okay, look, hey.
I can't do it.
I'm sure
I can't
they
do
put a lot
it.
of passion
Wait,
in
no, no,
this.
keep it going.
I'm
She
sure-
was about to
Do
kill
not
herself.
keep it going.
I'm sure they really cared about that.
No, no.
Because the game had a lot of backing.
Dude, she
they
was
put a
literally-
lot of effort into that.
She was literally about to kill herself and Thomas didn't do it.
Devilman Crybaby.
You just say Devil May Cry.
It's just on the brain.
It's on the brain. When you jump over the rail.
Alright, I'm gonna speedrun tutorial.
Yeah, that's what I found. But this one's better.
Yeah, it is better.
I give up. Mason wins again.
Domino, stop it!
Bro, I love
Eat it.
amino acids. Like, straight up.
Yo, dog, I love them.
Yo. Where would I
I
be?
told you about my friends, the cetethanoids.
Where would I be without amino acids, dude?
Yo, you know where I'd be?
I don't know, bro.
I have to
Take a
just
seat. You're acting wet. What are you saying?
Us.
No!
He doesn't have a moment. That's funny.
Wait, what am I watching?
I hate the game zones.
Good job, retard.
Jesus Christ.
It's terrible.
Oh!
Wow! Jordan is watching The Walking Dead instead of our stream.
That's big cringe, actually.
Wow. Let's all kill Jordan.
Imagine watching The Walking Dead. That's so angry.
Wait, did it?
I just said I thought.
You might be watching an old episode that's like
Yeah, instead of watching this epic gamer stream,
Bro, I can't.
like all of our millions of viewers.
Let's all make fun of Jordan real quick. Jordan, you're fucking fat.
Okay, no. That's not allowed, bro. Well, that's not allowed. It's
No, I'm talking about my pet dog. He needs to lose some weight.
He's obese for a dog, and that's not healthy. So,
TOS.
Yeah, I'm just
TOS.
worried about my dog's health.
TOS. TOS. TOS.
T-Con gets taken off YouTube.
That's what TOS stands for.
T-Conk off stream. Can I run this without the shotgun?
Probably. Just do it. Lol. Oh no, you need the shotgun!
The shotgun.
Wait, no you don't!
Milk.
Milk.
Milk acquired. Alright.
Milk gained.
Man, fuck ants.
Bruh! Ha, that was so
What just happened?
unlucky.
It's the worst.
Kobe, stop moving.
Go be that easy to stop functioning.
No, I missed the door.
Yes. Dude, that girl has more plot than she gets.
She did because people actually get about her as a character. Instead of just
Yikes.
small child. And he's very childish. Look at how childish this kid is.
I gotta be nice for him.
Bro, I got 9.99.
What's your
Imagine having ads
Was that-
on
What's your
YouTube
sandbox?
Premium.
Sandbox 2?
I'm watching Connie Carson's
I got
Fortnite
19.2.
right out there.
I have a friend who's like just fucking obsessed with HMOs. He's like blowing his head.
Is it Chris?
No, it's not. Where's Chris finding really funny? That's really
Yeah,
funny.
what the dog do?
He loves that. What is
No, not undercards.
Bro.
Why are you hopping with it now?
I have to add the bass.
could just like emit like out of my pores the like heavy bass boost sound.
Oh god.
Out of your pores?
Yeah, not in the mouth.
If I had a superpower, that's what it would be.
It's your standability.
Yes.
It's to make the noise of the world, but not actually stop time.
Oh.
Right, no list.
Yeah, I don't like that. I know, I don't like the undying part.
Sorry.
You missed the milk!
He needs some milk.
Kobe, you're so funny.
I'm a goofster, man. I'm a goon for life.
I'm going to kill you.
How so, T-Compulus? You don't even have the codes.
What?
The codes to my death machine. The only thing that can kill me, but I perfectly crafted for my...
Jordan says he's having fun watching all
He's having fun Walking Dead.
I got him music and staring card.
No. That game is scary. I whistle with my tongue and I don't mean to when I say this. He just straight up said, fuck you. He said, I'm having fun watching Walking Dead. I said, not as much fun as hanging out with us. He said, fuck you.
That's rude.
I don't understand what the problem is.
One, you're not here, and two, you're being mean.
Jesus Christ.
Like, how is that our fault? Like,
Yeah!
What?
Man, you guys suck for me not being there.
Man,
fuck
man,
you.
what did I do to you? He just, I said Jesus Christ, he said fag.
Yeah, you seem to
what?
take very well.
I'm just gonna say, okay, buddy, I'm leaving the beat.
Shit, Brony.
ah, 20.06.
No!
Milk.
No! Man, fuck this.
I do want those blown out reactions, but I generally don't have fast in my body.
Mason, what was your time again? Sandbox 3 or 2, whatever it was.
I think that's
Two.
it.
19.2.
Yeah, Sandbox 2.
Yeah, 19.2.
This game.
I got that ad that said, how in 2024 are you?
What?
I don't know what that means.
Look, and they're just absorbing the other ones.
No! That was such a good run, I missed the milk.
That's
Oh, God. Cannot do that.
Do.
that hurt. Why did that hurt so much compared to the other one? Okay, so this is what I see. My girlfriend broke up with me in the VR chat, okay? Look at this.
Stop, slow down.
Okay, so it's that picture, right? And then whenever you like do the thing, you look at it.
I can't make it anymore, bro. What the heck?
Especially picks up with the giant enemy spider.
I'm going to escape too.
Nice. That is the proper thing to do. Can you wait? What are the lyrics to that? Hold on,
I'm just writing more down.
Nice and that's my channel. What are the lyrics?
I'm writing more down right now.
Alright.
What song do you guys do?
Jordan, man.
No, it's Amen. What is it about?
I know a lot of the lyrics.
Ah.
Glory man. And Harry man.
Wait, how do I say that timer?
Lucky Ray.
Wait, no. No, dang it!
Why are we playing this game so much?
Slick. I went under the table! Mason, I was zooming, I just went, whoop!
Yes, please, actually. Oh man, I didn't.
Mason, we're playing it because it's slick, it's awesome, it's free, and it can run on Cameron's computer. Door. Bro, when's the taskbot gonna come out for for those, bro? Nah, yeah, 20.76. 20.74 is my swag, so. What did I hit? Bruh. As soon as I get this map sub 20 seconds, I'll be happy.
You did that already.
Nah, it's like 20.76.
Dang. Dang, bro. That was close. A water balloon.
A balloon.
I want to see that video actually.
A balloon.
A water balloon. No, I don't want a water balloon meme compilation. I want the original video. What is wrong with you?
Ah! It's 20 seconds.
No! That was so sassy, dude! You were in the sauce!
Bro, sauce?
Huh?
Sauce?
You were in the sauce, dude! You were crafting the sauce! Ow!
It's so hard to get sub 20 seconds, bro. I just can't go fast enough.
Ooh. Wait, no!
I couldn't recover. I was too close to the damn thing.
Yeah. What happened there?
I hit the bounce pad and it didn't send me straight up.
It sent you at a drastic angle.
It sent me at a good angle. Like, what is... Ah! That time I hit the edge of it, so I can understand why it sent me straight up that time. Doobie doobie doo ba doobie doobie doo ba.
It's apparently going to sing as soon as Phineas starts talking about answering the plan.
Ah. No! I can't.
This is so painful.
I can't swing on that last one. It either goes too high or you can't get high enough.
But
Like
you can't do it anywhere else.
the angles. That's just like what the angle is. Hey, build the Lego rescue helicopter.
Hey!
Oh, stupid idiot.
Man is trying to make no sense.
Bro, you got the whole squad laughing. Okay, new strat, alright? When I get to the final bit, I'm just gonna hit the corner. Nah,
Oh!
stupid.
That was next level gameplay!
Ah! Bro, next level gameplay.
Man, they just like recently released the Razor Dazzle.
Ow.
They really just released Ice Water, so...
Bro, they literally just released Water 2.
Water balloon.
Water.
Water 2, bro. It's out. Okay, I got a new strat, alright? I'm gonna try it out this
Just
time.
gotta perfect it.
I'm gonna try it out, see how it works, see how it goes. soon as your velocity dies, that the run's over, bro. If you lose your momentum, that's it.
You lose your momentum, that's cringe.
That is cringe.
Oh my god, yo!
What's up? What'd you find? What'd you got?
Evangelion kicks!
I got a new record.
Oh my god, this looks so good!
20.0.
They could never be my size though. This is the sadness. This is the sadness. They're a size M. Look at those, dude. Look at them.
What
Shoes?
Yay.
Lol.
So saucy.
Let me see.
Fly as heck, bro.
Oh my god.
They look so good.
I need me some of those.
Those are shoes.
I love them.
Can I lick them?
If they're on my feet,
Are those like official or are those like custom?
I think they're official because it says Ava Superman over. That looks so good.
What type of shoe? Like what brand?
It's a ABC mark. It's something in Japan. That is I care. Which is the sense. I really was trying to order some Bushiroku shoes because I was like right after I got a job, so I was finally having some money.
Is it like recap today? I'm getting recommended a lot of stuff that I've watched a long time ago.
Yeah, it's just trying. It doesn't know what to do anymore, so it's just trying to backtrack.
It gave up. YouTube algorithm gave up. It just goes off your watch history now.
Oh boy. Man, he watched this once. Maybe he'll watch it again.
That's what they're hoping for.
Joke's on you.
Mark, not interested. Why? I've already seen this video. Oh, do you want to see it again?
This image makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah. Is that a Fire Emblem?
I have no idea what
Language.
Bro, eat my balls, dude.
Oh my god, really? You'll let me?
Of course.
Yeah, it's not like he scratches
I thought I heard a
Stop! Play the ringtone on bass!
Yeah, me too. I agree. I agree.
Natalia Mary.
Ah!
So imagine being... Okay, so Jordan told me to eat chode.
Okay, so imagine.
Imagine each other. Wouldn't that just be so wacky?
I had to hit him with a sick comeback.
Bruh. You guys discovered any new swag strats?
What's this?
Oh god!
I'm so confused.
What is that?
What's this?
What's going on?
Hey, well, what am I saying? This guy has candy. Yeah! I thought the grenade launcher doesn't kill him. It's just like the guy beating yellow, but I got
You just posted cringe.
Will gets that message a lot.
Wait, so you watched the video, right?
Yes.
Did you watch it?
I think he's lying.
The movie that got nominated?
No.
I don't know what that means, but I'm probably mad about it.
Yeah, sorry, cringe.
I don't like how they dodge stuff.
No! What happened?
My abuela made this. If I make it bad, then she won't make me anything.
You gotta roll it like a pencil.
Did it break or something?
No, I stretched it a little bit wrong. That's fine.
Alright, that's it.
Like, I just have a problem with it. Stretch it. Right, I stretch it.
So do it, stream it.
I'm
Can you
playing.
stream that, Thomas?
I'm playing the Altoids. I'm playing the
Play Tetris
Altoids.
with the right theme.
I don't know what the right theme is.
It's probably theme B. It's
Theme A.
labeled under like everything. No, it's not. No, it's not. Not on his version. It plays like the freaking Christmas music.
I'm playing the Altoids, bro.
Oh wait, I can see the camera in real time.
Yeah, you can. Look, see? And then there's the stream preview where I give up. It's a few seconds behind.
Just a few. Just a few. Just a few. Can I play some Spanish music? Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
What is that? Is that Fire Alarm Remix, bro?
Oh
it's,
yeah.
It's a
dude.
fire alarm type beat.
Yo, is it Altoids time?
Yeah, bro, I'm playing Altoids.
Yo, can you switch chairs so I can put Carlson?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Oh my god, wait, stop.
What?
My times are so low now. I've played everyone like 20 times. Close.
Gonna hit that Carlson, you know what I mean?
Carlson gameplay will be significantly worse.
Ow!
Ooh!
Your desk chopped my knuckle.
Oh, shit.
Are you okay?
Yeah, man, I'm fine.
Alright, you see this escape 2 with 20.74 seconds? Well, I sucked.
So you won't be seeing anything lower than that?
Oh yeah! You'll see me making high scores.
What?
Okay.
No. Jordan said this.
Yeah, Mason said that. He took my phone and he just started sending random stuff, and I was like, Mason, what are you sending? He gave me my phone back, and Jordan's like, so who had your phone?
Wait, who is that rapper that got caught cheating on his girlfriend and posted on Twitter like balls in my face, blah 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 blah?
Balls in my face.
Offset.
That's a legend.
I sent that to Jordan.
Balls in my face, blah 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 blah. I'm gay.
Oh my god.
Oh, that's what I was on SoundCloud. I got like 4 different Tetris things.
Yes. Alright, beating the game, Thomas.
I want to do this. It's not Tetris.
The only good game is Sonic Spin.
That's the closest you're gonna get to it. What the hell is that, bro? It's like the freaking Norwegian off-brand.
What is game type
Tetris! Tetris! Tetris!
B?
No, this is what I want.
Yeah. This is stupid Tetris.
Yeah! That's the, what is it? What is that big building? the big one with the bubble, it's like round.
Your mom.
Not the
Oh, you made me this.
not the Dalai Lama, that's a guy.
The Taj Mahal.
Taj Mahal, thank you!
Oh, bro.
It shows the Taj Mahal on the menu. It's not Tetris. That's Taj Mahal. It's Taj Mahal Tetris. What if it was Tetris but everything was round? This is how Tetris will look in 2020. Oh my god, this is how SpongeBob will look in 2020. Oh my god. What in God's name is you doing?
Oh no.
I'm vibing, dude.
Oh, he's really getting it right now.
Now watch me gain speed.
And well, Thomas, you want to see me do the epic speedrun?
Now watch me there.
Oh, watch that wall, dude.
Yeah.
Get Earled.
Come on.
Karen.
Come on. No, how did I lose my speed?
Dude, don't ask questions. Just play the gaming. If you don't play the gaming currently, I will be so upsetting with you.
I'm playing Super Mario.
Yeah, well, guess what? I just got 200 gems in Pokemon Masters.
Alright, we're moving on to the next level since I beat that record.
You beat a record.
Yeah, I beat Thomas's record.
Thomas is pretty cringe.
Thomas is cringe.
Uh-oh.
God.
Uh-oh.
Come on.
Cringe. What if, Seth Rogen again, and you cringe and laugh for 5 hours straight?
I don't understand this level.
Doesn't stop. No matter what you do, you can't escape.
Yeah.
What if someone had an existential crisis over Seth Rogen? That'd be hilarious. I swear to God, he said that. I don't remember the exact transcript. I remember which one it was. I remember I was my sister sent me one of them posts. It was like go down the rabbit hole, and it showed a bunch of like things, interesting words and stuff, or something like that. Milk. Yeah. And there was this one guy. Hold on. He was called like the toy box killer. I have a transcript. Yeah, here it is. You want to read the transcript? It's terrible. No. You want me to read it to you? Because it's just as bad hearing it.
Okay.
I shouldn't say it on stream.
Shut off the cameras, dead ass.
Yoshi's dead.
Tape record, baby.
Bro, murder is pretty cringe. I love it when we just have normal audio.
Yes, you are.
Where's your proof? Pretty cringe.
Right there.
Pretty cringe making
Right
accusations.
there. There's proof right
Pretty
there.
cringe.
Is it still recording, Thomas?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's your proof.
No proof. I bet Seth Rogen can be your time.
Yo, can you plug in Mr. Frog Boy back?
No. I don't get anything in this situation.
Turn it on.
Why?
Where's my case?
Mason, I never read close
How
to
did
as long
you
as you
get
have.
a point
I would get
78?
like a minute in and just be so
No.
repulsed that I couldn't
On
read anymore.
Escape Zero.
He's in trees.
Sky Zero?
No, Escape
I don't
Zero.
know.
Hey Mason, look at my time for Escape Zero, bro.
Skip what?
I just got
Escape Zero.
.89 and this man has a .78.
9.78 pretty swag.
Mine probably is.
What is yours?
I mean, I have to open it. Mine's 0. Get wrecked, scrub.
Oh my
Yeah,
god.
yeah, 0. I literally have 0. This is definitely a read.
I know.
Here, I'm gonna glitch.
And guess what? There's like 5 more longer than that.
What are you doing?
He's trying to get a 0.
Karen, how'd you even do it? How did you do it?
I don't know. I got a 0 though.
The secret is being the most cringe in the room.
Oh man, I guess I can't get it.
Hungry, thirsty. Anyone hungry or thirsty? I'm the best stuff.
I'm not thirsty.
It's so
Different. I don't think I've known guys who did that shit.
Oh yeah.
It's not cooking. I can edit it
The fact that someone. Oh no, never mind.
Yeah, I'm not very good. It's so bad as to see real stuff.
Yeah.
You have one of the snack break?
Yes.
Yes, I've got enough faster time on 0. I have 9.5.
Snack break.
Stack break?
Snack break.
Peacock. I beat your record. What are you doing?
Shoes. I
To
need to
go-
take out the trash.
Do you need help or not?
I don't need help.
You want me to do pizza just for you?
Mason, come here.
Compare our.
Do that record on this computer.
What?
Do it.
No, because there's my record. It's
No.
still a record. It doesn't matter if it's on the computer.
No, go ahead and try.
Which computer?
This one.
You can't do it. Sorry.
9.1.
Oh my god, you brought Fortnite.
It's not possible.
Well, you have to move. Also, his sensitivity is so slow. That's the best you're getting.
I almost hit 8 minutes earlier, but I missed
8 minutes? Wow, so slow.
I'm not 8 minutes, 8 seconds. Jesus. It was like 8:90. I was so close. Oh my god! What the heck?
You're welcome.
Jesus!
I'll play Roblox.
How are you so fast?
I'm good at movement shooters.
Jesus.
Why do you think I've aced Titanfall nonstop?
Alright.
What was the time limit? It was like 8.66.
Yeah.
Okay, I got a faster time, so I'm still moving.
How?
That's cool.
I cannot. Okay?
What was that?
That was them banging on the window. It scared me for a second.
Those are like gunshots. They're jamming.
They did sound like gunshots. Yo, where did Kobe go? Where did the Kobe go?
He's right behind you.
He's right behind me.
Are you good or fucking jamming out?
How much money did I get?
1,000
Thank you.
dollars.
doing. It was like a perfect. You know, Escape 2, where it's like the platform. Like,
No.
Well, you know at the end where there's
Fuck
like
it, you're going
the
to
ramp and the lava, there's like a bend like this. Yeah. I did it perfectly. Like I went ahead and bounced like a grenade, like hit the wall, like the perfect wall jump, and then I like got hit by a scribble.
Fuck it, no gun flow today.
They call him Mr. Fun.
I got 15 seconds, dude. That was so fast.
They call me.
They're trying to be great.
They call me I'm myself. Play that and play it for me. Oh,
Yeah, that's how I got the fastest time. Thomas, you know how big of a flex it is? I got a high score for you.
You know how much of a pain this level's being? I just stopped using the gun.
It's such an easy level.
I just stopped using the gun. Alright, what if I go backwards? That didn't help. Alright.
not sure it's everything.
I won't. That's not even a thing. Nice. Yes.
Jesus.
This, I don't even get tackled. Jesus. I really hope no one has ever bought anything like this. I said, I really hope no one has ever bought anything like
Oh,
this.
there's definitely people that don't
That's not poetry. This is a weird club, man. Why am I looking at this? That is disgusting. What is this? Why is it so dark? Why do you go to dimly lit room to take pictures of this garbage?
What are you talking about?
Where's there ink everywhere? I get it.
Oh my god. Isn't that funny?
That's really funny. What? You see? Nice, yes, good content, yes. Yes, this is exactly what I've done like that, yes. There's just so much. Should I go Super Saiyan? Oh. I can't read that. Oh my god. Yeah, he is a
I'm
full gamer
vibing.
right now.
Yes, 360.
Dude, I went under the milk table, came up too late, did it, and it did a full like 360, and I ended up using the milk.
You're really doing 360s right here?
Oh,
Yes, good contact. Yes, good contact.
oh.
That's not even.
No,
No, flush.
request.
Oh, and that's why it was up there. Okay, that makes sense.
This is just adorable. Look at that little guy.
Can I zoom in?
Look at him. Look at him. Hamster.
Thomas, what if I do the entire level backwards?
That's
and...
it. That's good.
Alright, I'm gonna try something, alright?
Do it. Upvote that.
Alright, entire level backwards and without a gun.
Nice.
Well, there goes my plan. Alright, we're trying this again.
That's ironic.
Alright, there we go. I made it past the first door. There we go. One door left. Milk! Milk! Backwards and no gun.
Milk.
I'm watching on the replay because I forgot to watch.
Well, I guess we're taking this route.
Someone owns this. Someone has this.
Yeah, you will slip.
Someone has this like, at their house.
Oh, yeah, that.
Like on their bed. Like, all they see is like,
Yeah, if they die, then like the family has to live at the house.
oh god.
Yes, good contact. Good contact. Yes, this is what I'm here for.
Oh, it's actually.
What are you doing? Yes, you did. Waggy. Don't get that. Huh? What's the correlation there?
Oh.
I don't get it.
Oh, yeah. What's that? All the way through.
Oh. Oh, what do you think? Can you figure it out?
Oh, God! Oh! Oh, God! Oh, my God!
You sure you're not
God! Oh, God! This should be illegal! This should be illegal! That's not okay! Oh, God.
Wait. Cody,
Yes,
Cody,
this is good content.
What is
This is good content.
what should be illegal?
R/handle.
Cave Johnson, we're done here.
R/wanted? That's like